Alrighty, well, here we go. We're gonna kick it off. Bonjour, everyone. Thank you all for being here. A few housekeeping notes. This is like essentially a very big meeting, so if you aren't already muted, if you can mute yourself now, that would be really ideal. And I already mentioned this, but if you're just coming in, I would suggest perhaps turning your video off because that'll help with the internet connection. There will be a lot of participants for the for this hour, so that can help with your connection again. Also, changing your view so you're not seeing every single window all at once. That can be really helpful for your internet connection as well. Yeah, and again, thank you all for being here. One of the remarkable things about our current situation is that no matter where you are right now in this moment, we can all still be together to celebrate this book. And in the chat, I've seen so many different places listed, different states, different countries. And while at Birchbark Books, we definitely do miss seeing people in person, I think one of the beautiful things about a technology like this is we can all, as far away as we are, still be really together. So that's really beautiful. In this moment to celebrate the release of Anton's new book, Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians, but Were Afraid to Ask, the Young Reader's Edition. If you have your copy, you can hold it up. The joy and excitement we've seen at Birchbark Books surrounding this release has been utterly tremendous. People are excited to read this book and even more excited, I think, to give the book to the young people in their lives. This is a time for Indigenous literature, and it is a time where young Indigenous people are making their voices heard and gathering more and more information every day. So a book like Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians for young readers is simply perfect for the moment, and it is a joy to be here on behalf of Birchbark Books with all of you. A little kind of rundown of how it'll go. We're going to have a lively discussion with Anton, followed by a reading from the book. He will be reading from the book. And then we're going to have a Q&A, a question and answer part from the audience, an audience Q&A. So if you have any questions that you're thinking about, you can go ahead and drop them in the chat, and myself and Halee will keep track of the chat and yeah, make sure to try to get to as many questions as we can during the Q&A, audience Q&A part of it. Yeah, so you can add them down there. Anton's books are available at birchbarkbooks.com. We are at the moment have sold through all of the signed stock, but he will come down soon and sign more. So I don't think we've got any signed copies right now. You can still get the books. When we have more signed copies, we will post about it on our social media. And yeah, so we're Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those places and stuff. So we'll put it there. And yeah, we are absolutely excited to be here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Halee, who's going to kick off our event.
Okay, all right, bonjour, everybody. Let's get started. I know you all want to hear from Anton most of all. So my first question for him today, to talk about the release of his new book, we would love to know about your process adapting this book from adult version to a young reader version. We want to know what were your goals, what were challenges, what did you want to make this book really powerful for young readers?
Bonjour, welcome everybody. Miigwech, Wago Shindagu, Migazi and Doden, Azaga Squad, Jimaikog and Dunjiba. Nice to see you all. Welcome everybody. Look forward to a good conversation with everyone. And Halee, thanks for a great question. I'm so excited to bring this book into the world. Been working with Nick Thomas at Levine Querido. He's on our Zoom today, so is Arthur Levine. And really the whole team, it really takes a village to bring a book into the world. So even before I jump on your question, I want to say thank you to that team for all of the work with the book. I also want to acknowledge the folks at the Minnesota Historical Society who had brought the adult version of this into the world. Love that entire crew, still making books with them. And they're really, really wonderful. And then also everyone at Birchbark Books. We did the book launch for the adult version with Birchbark Books, and both the store, the team there, Louise Erdrich, have been great supporters of mine throughout the years. So I want to give some love to everybody. So with this project, I'll share a little bit more about how I got into the whole thing. But for the young reader version, I never really expected this book to do what it did, but it kind of, the adult version took off. And I'm busy. I routinely do at least 25 public speaking events a year, and a lot of them have been on this topic. It's put me in front of young people in K-12 schools and community events for years. They're so bright, inquisitive, want to know. Most of us throughout most of American history have gotten a sugar-coated version of Chris Columbus and the first Thanksgiving, and not a lot else to more deeply understand the first people of the land. And so I wanted to do something beyond, the original project and speak directly to young people. So this book ended up growing in terms of content and areas. We rewrote every single section of it and retooled it so that it's, speaking directly to young readers. And I think it's going to be a great success in that endeavor. Halee, did you want me to share just a little bit about how the whole project came into being as well?
I'd love to hear that. Yeah.
Okay. So I kind of stumbled into this by accident. I like a lot of people finishing high school, thought I was going to get out of Dodge and never come back. And I also had some painful racial experiences going to high school and so forth. And I thought, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to get away from the brambled racial borderland and make it to a new place. I got into Princeton University, and I thought, even better, everyone will be better educated. The ignorance will be behind me. And I think the first question I got out there was, hey dude, where's your tomahawk? And I remember thinking, oh no, it's following me out here. And there's nothing like leaving home to make you want to go back. So, then my goal was to make it through college and then go home and never leave. And at one point I heard there was this Comanche spiritual leader coming to the New Jersey woods to run sweat lodge ceremonies. And I'm maybe a bit naive, but, just wise enough to know that the Comanche come from Oklahoma and Texas, and what are people doing in New Jersey, but homesick enough to go check it out. So I went out there, and there might've been about 20 white folk waiting for this sweat lodge ceremony at about 4 p.m, sun's up, but they were all completely naked. And I remember thinking, is this real? Part of me wanted to laugh because dang, there's 20 naked people sitting, standing around in the woods. Part of me wanted to run because dang, there's 20 naked people standing around in the woods. And part of me was getting mad, like, dang, is that what they think we're all about? But being naive, I opened the car door, and I'm immediately folded into a tight embrace by one of these naked strangers who's hugging me close and hard, saying, I'm so sorry what my people did to your people. So now, awkward, the desire to laugh, run, get mad is just growing. And then I looked at this woman's face, and she was an elder, and there were tears welling up in her eyes. And it occurred to me that no matter how misguided she might have been, her emotional response was sincere. And it also occurred to me that if I just got mad and told her off, or walked away and never said a word, she'd keep on thinking what she's thinking, or thinking the only real native she ever met was an angry one. Something that's kind of unfair that happens to people from really any marginalized community is they get asked to be spokesperson for the entire community, which doesn't usually happen to white folk. Like, what do white people think about abortion? Good or bad? We just know it's not that simple, right? There's a diversity of opinions and emotionally charged opinions at that. So ultimately, I said, I had to think quick, and I said, ma'am, could you put some clothes on because I would love to talk to you about all of this. And she did. And we actually had a good conversation. I think she learned a few things, but I did too. And, you know, in a weird way, you could say I learned something from a naked stranger in the New Jersey woods, which is that it's important to make safe space. When people have a question, to give a meaningful answer, not just an angry rebuke. And after that, I started saving the questions. And boy, did they come. There were so many questions. Terminology, is it Indian, Native American, Aboriginal, Indigenous, First Nation person, or what? You know, what's a naming ceremony? What is tribal sovereignty? You know, what's your perspective on mascots? And of course, even since the adult version of the book came out, we've had Dakota Access Pipeline, that confrontation at the Lincoln Memorial. We've had the current debates going on about cancel culture and things like that. There's been so much going on. I think the racial landscape in America has been shifting and changing. You know, just 2 weeks ago, I was training the staff at Hennepin County District Court who are going to be handling the George Floyd trial. And I think America has been through a lot in recent years, just with our political environment, our cultural environment. Feels like we're on the verge of another attempted racial reckoning, and it's not easy lifting. And through no fault of our own, as individuals, we landed here. We didn't get a blank canvas we can paint from the beginning. And so now we need to find a way to communicate with one another, learn from and about one another, and try to make the world a better place.
I think that's really, really beautifully said. And I just, you know, it kind of makes me wonder and think about, like, when you're writing a book like this, and you're really trying to talk a lot about, you know, even at times very difficult things, you know, how do you avoid going to that place of anger and making it a safe space? You know, what are the things that kind of enter into the situation to avoid just, you know, just, I don't know, yeah, just kind of being kind of perhaps overtaken by anger and by upset and making it a safe space where there is some anger present, because I think in many ways, you know, there would have to be, but also where it can be a place where learning is happening and stuff like that. How does that kind of come about, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to learn if you feel like you're getting beat up around the ears. You know, at the same time, we've got all kinds of problems in this world that we need to draw attention to. I think there's an analogy that often helps me in setting the right tone and approach for this kind of work. And it is difficult. One of the hats I get to wear is I do a lot of racial equity and cultural competency work. And, you know, if we are too hard and edgy, we can chase everybody away from the table and complain about eating alone. And if we're too much just about pats on the back and we don't do any real lifting, everybody walks away too, because there's no change going on. And so it's not really a silver bullet solution or a scientific one so much as an art to engaging in a meaningful conversation and communication. And so for me, an analogy that really helps me in the Ojibwe world, we have a clan system. So there are animals, birds, and fish, and they're kind of like sigil for your house, but they're also a spiritual guide. And our original chief clans were the loon and the crane. And so the loon has the, you know, the pretty voice, they represent diplomacy. And sometimes they're considered the lesser chiefs. At a treaty signing, they would usually speak first and do most of the talking. And then afterwards, the crane clan, which represented kind of command form of leadership, would come in and say, I think you know where we're coming from. Now here's how it's going to be. And to me, I happen to be from the Eagle clan, but it's a good analogy for how to be with humans. To first seek to understand, seek to be understood. And then when it comes down to it, it's okay to be strong in your beliefs, you know, to have a moral compass and things like that. But if we start with the crane, tell everybody how it's going to be, then we end up alienating others from the conversation. So there's a value to building bridges. Leadership in many ways is influence, and you have to get into relationship with people so you can take them somewhere. And if you're just, barking at people, it doesn't work. Honestly, there's enough horrible stuff going on to make people mad for the next 500 years, right? The other thing that kind of helps me is I've been proven wrong before, but I generally assume that people are kind of doing the best that they can. A lot of times the problems are that, we might even have shared values about things like freedom and peace and stuff like that, but look at the battlefield differently about how to get there. And a lot of times we've been, all of us, kind of ill-equipped. Think about a teacher asked to teach something about Native Americans who only has been trained themselves with like the sugar-coated version of Chris Columbus and the first Thanksgiving. And they start thinking, if I say this, oh, the Italians are going to get so mad at me. If I say that, have you ever seen an angry Native mom? What am I going to do? As little as possible. And then the end result is, and this is my experience going to school, K-12, aside from a few experiences where people actually were really mean and it was obviously about race, most people just really wanted me to succeed. But what was screaming at me was not the mean words so much as the absent narratives. From good-hearted people who wanted me to succeed, the absent narrative said, you and yours aren't important, aren't relevant, and don't matter. And so how important it really is for Indigenous people and really all groups to be properly represented in who's doing the teaching, what's being taught. It's really important. And so I'm really hopeful that this book is going to leverage, that discussion and access to useful information in a voice that's approachable and help us bridge the gap.
Thank you, Anton. This next question might be kind of jumping off of what you were just talking about, but in terms of, how we communicate, how we learn, how we teach things about the Native community, Native American issues. We were wondering, how do you craft this book for young adult readers in a way that isn't, how do you avoid sugarcoating at the same time writing to younger readers? How do you write to them without, I think the word Anthony and I were kind of talking about, like, you don't want to talk down to younger readers because they have the capacity to understand and fully understand these issues. And we're wondering how you sort of approach that point of view.
Yeah, here too, first of all, there's no way to say everything there is to know about anything in any one book. And I got a house full of natives and I don't even know what they're thinking some of the time, so I represent one person's view. And so one of the things that I think makes this really approachable is, instead of saying, here's how it is, I would say, here's my experience, or here's how this looks to me. And even as the questions come up, it's been very helpful to just, instead of say you, and get into a finger pointing match or something like that, say, this is what it felt like for me, and this is what it looked like to me. And ultimately, I think that creates the right tone. And frankly, everybody loves and relates to personal stories and narratives. So there's a huge range of topics here, from politics to religion to tribal enrollment to hot button, contemporary topics and things like that. And so with all of those things, as it's relevant, I'll speak to my own personal experience. I too have often had to go out hunting for answers. When I first wrote the adult version, I was thinking I'm writing for non-Native people who haven't had exposure, but I was so heartened by the response of Native people who get bombarded by all the same questions too. And as a Native person, I realized that even for myself, my mother was the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota, became a tribal judge. And at the end of high school, I would have been hard pressed to explain what tribal sovereignty is and how it works, because I knew what it was like living in this skin. I knew what it was like when I was out and about and on the street or traveling to a different place or whatever. But all of that history, even some of the cultural stuff, it doesn't just get handed on a silver platter. And so Native people were really interested in this stuff too. Something like 87% of the state standards in the United States don't require teaching anything about Native anything after 1900. So the message almost becomes we're something that happened in the past. And even, if you're going to a tribal school, 100% Native kids, chances are you've got almost an entirely white teaching corps with the same curriculum everyone else has. So some things you learn by experience, and other things you got to hunt for answers.
I think that's really, really just wonderful. And it just makes me think, when you're writing a book like this and you're thinking about your younger audience, all audiences, but definitely that younger audience and younger readers, especially, like considering just the current climate and how strange everything is, what role do you see younger readers playing in this current climate? I would say broadly young readers in general, but also specifically young Native readers, especially now, again, where I feel like young Indigenous minds and voices are being so activated. And then the interesting thing too is a lot of that activation, I think, as I've kind of seen from my own kind of lens, is through digital media and social media and all of that, like, so then that's so, and then we have the book. So yeah, the role, I suppose, kind of, as you're writing, is that you see young readers playing,
So
especially Native readers.
Yeah, two things on this. So first of all, it is amazing what happens to the human mind. A 5-year-old is working on letters. A first grader might be working on sight words. You might have second graders who are already getting into Harry Potter books. Like it goes fast, the ascension into literacy. And then once people hit about 10 years old, you still have this explosion with what's happening in the human brain, and people are going to TV, Xbox, Netflix, social media, and it's been replacing literary traditions for entertainment and information for a lot of people. So it's so vital to have written things that are fun, engaging, and relatable. So we geared this book for, readers 10 years old and up. And I think, there's a huge spectrum of maturities and academic aptitudes within, that population. And I think it really works for connectivity and relatability, and even the span of topics. So with the younger kids, like even on there's quite a bit on Columbus, for example, in there. If you're working with very young kids, you don't need the lithographs of, people getting their hands chopped off or something, and that kind of stuff. But a lot of people don't even have awareness of how Native people have shaped the entire world. That even the chocolate, vanilla, tomatoes, potatoes, these kind of things came from Indigenous people, and how it changed how everybody eats their food, how we trade, how we travel, the contributions Native people made to making this country a great place. Even when somebody's learning about George Washington crossing the Delaware, they don't always realize that waiting on the other side to rescue the, early Revolutionary Army or the Oneida Indians with supplies and reinforcements and things like that. And so there's just elevating visibility and relatability, I think, is hitting on multiple goals. So one is tracking people to a high level of literacy and academic aptitude, with something that makes sense to them and is fun and interesting and relatable. And the other thing is delivering really useful information that they might not otherwise get. And so that's kind of the goal. I get to experiment on my own children a lot because I've got 9 of them. And so I've, they don't just get drug around with me to my events and things like that. I'll have them read a section to me, or I'll read a section to them, and experiment with them and make sure it's, even test it out. Like, am I being too wordy and academic? I'm talking to adults tonight, so I might sound like Mr. Articulate and, you know, super academic or something. But yeah, so I'll test it, field test it on them. And I can tell what's going to actually, you know, if it's making them laugh, or if they're like, whoa, what's that? You know, or do you have a picture of that? And then we go hunt for one, you know, and so that was kind of fun working with them.
I think that's just so lovely and so profound. And it just reminds me, that's kind of one of the joys of working at a store like Birchbark Books, is seeing the young people coming in and seeing them have that kind of hunger for knowledge and the stories that you know these books hold. I think it's so wonderful, and it's so important as well to make sure focus is on young people, and also and all people, especially young people, when their minds are so fertile and they're able to take in so much, and knowing that they can understand some of these unbelievably difficult subjects, and that being able to talk to them directly is so helpful and so important. So I think that's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, when I was working on this, I was thinking a lot about my son Evan. He's kind of middle of the pack, and he's in 8th grade right now, and he's just, you know, a little bit shy, kind of introverted. He's, you know, probably the brightest young warrior in the village, and loves to spend his time outside, and sometimes quite comical, you know, like he would say, Dad, can I go dig a hole? And I was like, we live in a really rural area. So I'd say, you know what, as long as I can't see it anywhere from this house, you go ahead and dig a hole. You know, he'd be out there all day long. And then the next day he'd say, Dad, can I have a couple friends over? And the couple friends would come over, you know, bringing shovels, and they'd be out there all day. And then I started thinking, I better go see what's going on, you know, come out there, head pops out of the ground, disappears 30 feet away, pops out again. I'm like, all right, you guys, this is awesome, but I'm worried about sandy soil and these things, tunnels collapsing. So all these tunnels need to be converted to trenches immediately. So they're out there, you know, and that was kind of the way that he would roll. And this year's a big transition year for him because he's going to be going into high school next year. And, you know, I remember at times he would feel at war with what was going on in the school, you know, like there wasn't anything about him that he'd rather be out in the woods. He'd rather be building his fort. He'd take the 4-wheeler and go down to the rummage sale down the road, and he'd come back dragging like a table inverted with a bunch of chairs and stuff like that. And he's going by, Dad, it was free. And so thinking about his academic and literary development, you know, I was field testing a lot of things on him and having him try out sections and stuff like that. And so it was cool when there was a section that really spoke to him or something that seemed to light him. I gave the dedication to him on this one. I don't know how many they saw that. It says, for my son, Evan, the navigator, you're the one you've been looking for. The world is your map and the compass is inside you. And so I was thinking of him a lot, you know, and I really feel like sometimes as Native people, we struggle with hypervisibility. That'd be like racial profiling, stuff like that. But sometimes it's invisibility and marginalization, not being seen, being subsumed into mainstream culture and things like that. And so elevating that visibility, really, really important. And so I was just looking for the little tells and reads with him as I was field testing some of this on him. And yeah, I got high hopes. And it was cool with him this year, like with his transition. He was like, you know what, Dad, I decided I want to go ahead and do these pre-AP classes and different things. We got him all registered. And so he was like, it was heartening to see him like elevate his goals, you know, academic goals, at the same time that, of course, he's busy building forts and stuff like that.
I think that's lovely. And it's that invisibility thing, you know, that affects, you know, natives of all ages, but also the way it affects young people, you know, and the hypervisibility, all of that, the way it just has those long lasting effects on our young people, and the reminder to, through literature and all these ways to, you know, it's like the reminder to check in with young people, you know, to make sure they're doing okay, because there's so much in this world that's very difficult to see. So that's really beautiful. Halee, do you have any more questions?
I'm wondering if now would be a good time if Anton could treat us to a little reading from the book.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. I think it's kind of fun fielding the questions, but I'll give you a little bit. So maybe I'll give you a little bit from the conclusion, and then we can field questions with whatever time we have here. So here's a little bit from it. Sometimes the brambled racial borderland of my youth seems as impenetrable as it ever was. Indians continue to be imagined more than they are understood. Public and political backlash against Indian casinos and treaty rights is still obvious. Indians are still often used as mascots for sports teams with broad resistance to change or a lack of understanding of the impact of that resistance on Native people. Problems persist in Indian country, and with the types of drugs and ease of access to the modern world, things like substance abuse seem even worse. But looks can be deceiving. A few years ago, I brought my van to Kenny's Clark Station in Bemidji, Minnesota to get new tires. I've known the owners, the Mershmans, most of my life, and I like to support family businesses in our area. They've always been kind and respectful to me, and they know how to fix cars. Paying for new tires is a painful experience for a penny pincher like me, but I was amazed when I settled my bill to hear owner Alan Mershman tell me, "Miigwech kikawabamin minua." My white mechanic spoke to me in the Ojibwe language, my language. This had never happened to me before, and it would not have been possible just a few years earlier. Something was changing in the borderland. And I kind of go on from there and describe a time when there was our Chamber of Commerce had their publicity director on the public radio going off on a racial rant about natives, and there was a tribal boycott of Bemidji and kind of some of the tougher chapters in our town. And then how did we get to this? And so, I kind of explained about some of the work that's been going on. By the way, we even have bilingual signage on the cop cars now. It says Ganawanjigang Minawa Nadamagang, to protect and serve and things like that. And to me, that doesn't fix all the big problems. Like, the data sets are still pretty horrifying with regards to the criminal justice system and people of color, Indigenous people in particular. And as, even though that's part of the reality, our chief of police has been coming to a regular courageous conversation about race and is trying to do community policing and is trying to reach out and pull in voices and things like that. And there's been a lot of exciting stuff happening at the tribal level and around environmental issues and things like that. And so I do feel a lot of hope. And then go on to say it can be very frustrating for non-Native people to know how to best reach out to Indians or help address the problems in Indian country. Most human beings are terrified of offending others or being accused of racism. Sometimes it seems safer and easier not to teach about Indians, not to learn more and more deeply about them, and not to advocate for change. But we have to be brave if we want to make the world a better place. So don't imagine Indians, understand them. Keep asking questions, reading, listening, and advocating for change. Don't tolerate stereotypes. Don't be afraid to ask everything you wanted to know about Indians. And if you're Native, learn as much as you can about yourself and give meaningful responses to those questions rather than angry rebukes. It really does make a difference. In the words of my white mechanic, Alan Mershman, Miigwech, Kikawabamin, Minawa. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. And that actually leads into a question that we have from Arthur. He asks, can you speak a little about language preservation efforts?
There's a lot going on right now. Broadly in the world, there are about 7,000 languages still spoken on planet Earth. About 2,500 of them are highly endangered, like you can count the number of speakers on two hands. Only about 100 languages are actively and widely taught at colleges and universities on planet Earth. And so it's a time, like people are aware that we're at a bottleneck period where there's, whole species in the natural world going extinct, but there's also a bottleneck with human bodies of knowledge and ways of knowing. And, each language embodies a unique worldview, a unique way of looking at things. So like in the book, for example, we talk about, how in different languages, indigenous languages, there are whole ways of looking at the world. In Ojibwe, for example, our word for elder, Gitchiaya'a, means great being. Our word for an elderly woman, Mindimuye, means one who holds things together and describes the role of the family matriarch. And in English, you got old woman, elderly woman, aged woman, So if you operate in Ojibwe, you don't have to say things like respect your elders. It's kind of built right in with any word you could use to talk about them. But in English, we don't have that. I would say the English-speaking world is pretty ageist. And so one of the things that I think is really healthy in, for example, an Ojibwe worldview is that there are kind of 4 seasons in a person's life: spring, summer, fall, winter, young people, babies, young people, adults, elders. And there's always something to look forward to. It's a blessing to become an elder. There's even something, if you do a good deed for an elder, they might touch their head and touch your head and say, Wabekwan Bejik Iminen, like I'm giving you a white hair, saying you get to live a long life too. You're going to get there one good deed at a time. You're going to earn one white hair at a time. And so, it's a different way of looking at the world. When I think about what humans have put each other through, like, honestly, white folk were being really mean to each other for a long time, developing colonialism before they kind of took it to the rest of the world, right? And one of the features of colonialism is taking a culture and a language and using it to supplant others. But the ways that it's done often involve a lot of violence, which makes more problems. So why would we think that all the problems created by the colonial way of solving problems are going to be solved by the colonial way of solving problems? And they're not. So indigenous languages and cultures have more than vestigial remnants of different ways of looking at the world and solving problems. We have a gift to give the rest of the world, to pollinate the garden we're all trying to harvest from, as well as something for ourselves. So to me, there's a lot at stake with indigenous language revitalization. It's not just about another pretty bird sounding in the forest. And within the US and Canada, for example, there's a real effort underway. Hawaiian is one of the first real success stories in the United States. 30 years ago, that language was illegal for use in public schools. Today, it's one of the official languages for the whole state of Hawaii. They went from 1,000 speakers on planet Earth to 24,000 speakers now. And over 3,000 have learned it as their first language in the home. It's an inspiring story. There's a lot to share about how they got there. And it's probably another discussion that I'm happy to get into if you want. Some of the other tribes that are really doing a lot would include Cherokee, Mohawk, Blackfeet, Ojibwe, and there are many others that are engaged in varying forms of indigenous language revitalization. Gives me a lot of hope, and I really think that it can provide a major source of empowerment for indigenous people and tribes, but also an important gift for everybody else. Yes, Menominee, Navajo. Mm-hmm.
That's really beautiful. Another question we have from Pam. She asks, how can we subtly recognize our Native American students each day? Middle schoolers generally don't like a lot of attention.
Yeah, so if you're in the education universe, it's tricky business, but here's what I recommend. You do want to provide space where people can bring in their stories and share their experiences. You don't want to put your kids on the spot and expect them to be the expert or the content expert who delivers things in your class. So for example, if you have a student who just doesn't know something about their culture, they might feel put on the spot or shamed or embarrassed or things like that. But at the same time, if you just ignore it, then we end up kind of running an assimilation program with the school. So there is a way to navigate that. And that way is by, first of all, creating space and inviting those voices in. Also, diversifying the curriculum so everybody gets a chance to learn about themselves as well as the rest of the world. And then also in education, we can also just unload and leave behind us the expectation that the teacher be the content expert on every single group on planet Earth. It's not a realistic expectation. But if the teacher asks good guiding question and guides inquiry, can invite students to go out and search for that and bring it back to exhibit to the school in the form of anything from a science poster board project to a video project to a book report, or there's so many different ways to do it. That makes room for multiple perspectives and can really open up learning. And some school districts have done this remarkably well. Portland Public Schools, I was doing a bunch of work with them. They have 58 different languages spoken in that school district, and they've almost completely eliminated racially predictable disparities in truancy, test scores, graduation rates, and college matriculation rates. Somebody's figuring something out. We should pay attention. Hey, Jennifer. Nice to see you. We do some work together with the National Summit for Courageous Conversation about race. And she's talking about representation, making sure that Native people can see themselves reflected in the materials used for teaching. Also, who's doing the teaching and how it's being taught. And it is not a simple effort. It's ongoing work. Our demography is constantly shifting and changing. And there's some really innovative work. There's a guy named John Fila who's doing some work in one of the suburban Twin Cities school who had a great idea. He said, we've been buying all of our textbooks from Texas and from California, written by people who have never been to Minnesota. And his idea was, let's develop our own material, but let's publish it online with a Creative Commons license so anybody can use it. And we'll have our own licensed K-12 educators do that. We'll be able to pull in diverse voices. And over time, we will have so much material available that we won't need to buy books from Texas and California. We may not even need to buy books. We'll be able to save districts millions of dollars that can be purposed for other kinds of books that we're going to need for literacy development and things like that, instead of just the textbook universe. And so they've been working, and it's really pretty remarkable effort. I think we do need to be attentive to who lands in front of us. Some of the other success stories I've seen in education include, Ojibwe Language Immersion School in the Hayward Lakes area of Wisconsin that has dramatically outperformed in academics, including academic tests in English administered in English, even though their entire staff speaks only Ojibwe to the kids every single day. They too are outperforming, and it's really a remarkable and inspiring story. The Obamas went out there to visit them because the data sets were so impressive, and the kids just sang and spoke to them in Ojibwe. It's pretty cool.
Looking at the topic of early education, I see a question that is kind of a good follow-up. So Taryn here asks, you mentioned a courageous conversation effort in Bemidji. Could you speak about how that started and any advice you would have for a small community, including teachers and students, how they would go about starting one?
Yeah, so it is vital that we pull in multiple perspectives. There's a friend of mine named Cortland Butts who uses a really great example where he'll hold up his finger and he'll say, what is this? And it could start a fight if you don't clarify the language, like in the language of body parts, that's a finger, but in the language of numbers, well, that's a 1. And in the language of space, well, that's up. So who's right? And they're all right. It depends on the context, the language we're using to talk about it. And so all too often when we need to talk about a tough topic like race, or something like that, somebody's coming in saying, this here's a finger, it's not an elbow, it's not a toe, the rest of you, shh. And somebody's listening saying, that's a 1, not a 2. See, they just don't understand. And we totally miss each other. But when we can see that as a 1 and a finger and up and actually all the other many things that it can mean, then we have those multiple perspectives. When you get good at it, you can even be multicultural. That's so vital. By the way, it's good advice if you ever want to be in a marriage, raise a kid, work in a workplace that has more than 2 people, much less navigate, broader society or education or things like that. So we need those multiple perspectives. How do you engineer a courageous conversation at a time when most people have a racially homogenous favorites list on their smartphone, right? We have to actually make that happen. And we are more segregated in some ways than we were before desegregation, even when interracial marriage is at an all-time high. It's ironic, it's weird, it's hard to understand. We see this with gentrification, we see this with white flight, we see this in many different ways. So we have to make our own luck. So that means, reaching out. How many people in education have sat on a committee where the majority of the people were people of color? Not too often, And so what can we do to pull in those voices? It's like, what happens if you have the all male gender equity team? They're probably missing a perspective. The optics probably aren't good, And so you need that. You need that diversity. And if you have both men and women on the team, you have, a representation across race, sexual orientation, things like that. You have these needed perspectives. And you don't have to go out and get their buy-in after you cook something up. So some of the ways to do that, there's stuff like that Marnita's Table, which are active in some of the urban areas where they pair up people from other affinity groups for conversation. I could recommend the National Summit for Courageous Conversation About Race. They have a great platform. It's kind of a fee-for-service program, and the conference, does cost money and stuff like that. But they have kind of a protocol for how to talk about race that I think is really beautiful and helpful. There are many other things, Lee Moon-Hwa and others that are kind of racial equity advocates and educators that have toolboxes for mindful conversation and facilitation that I think are very useful. And so we just have to hunt for the tools, and then put them to work.
I love that. A question that I know probably a lot of people are kind of wondering. Aurora asked, can you discuss the inspiration for the book cover?
Oh, man. So I have to credit other people with this one. First of all, in the Ojibwe world, the floral motif is a really important part of the culture. It's both a representation of what we see in the natural world. And then even in our creation story, we talk about how, the creator placed, water and plants and animals and birds and fish, and last of all, humans. And that it's also kind of like a humble reminder that we're the last thing put here on earth. If humans disappeared from the earth, everything else would probably get along even better than before. But if any of those things put before us disappeared, we would suffer and probably perish. And so it's a pretty cool, there's a lot of meaning behind that floral motif. But we actually have a dynamite Lakota beadworker who put this together. And, Janice Schmieding was custom beaded this. I'll show this to you because it's hanging on my wall real quick. But yeah, here's the original beadwork. So she beaded this. And then we just put the words in there. I got to give Nick Thomas some credit because, he knew the beadwork artist. He knew a bit about Ojibwe culture, and he helped put us all together to come up with this really dynamite cover, which I think is striking. It's a long title for a book. It's kind of a busy title, and it makes special challenges for designing a book cover. It's not like one word, and I think it's just really dynamic. Oh yeah, question from Kendra was it's John Fila, F-I-L-A. You can shoot me a email. My email and stuff is up on my website, and then I'll get you his contact info if you want. Yes, and Kendra's mentioning that they're hunting for resources. First of all, there's been an explosion over the past 10 years in literature developed by Indigenous writers, especially in the young reader and kids lit world. You know, obviously Levine Querido has a great list, but there are many others out there as well. And so if you're not finding books by Native authors, you're not looking very hard, because they are out there. Birchbark Books is full of books by such authors. So there are a lot of different ways to go about finding them. There was mention of the Minnesota Department of Education, American Indian Education Department, with a list of vetted resources. On my website, I've got a list of vetted resources by Native authors about Native things. They're kind of broken out by subjects. Actually, in the back of the Everything You Wanted to Know book, we've got lists of recommended readings, and they're broken down by, you know, literature, history, you know, different things like that. So you can kind of hunt by section. So the info is out there.
Nick Thomas, shout out to the Heart Drum Press. Yes, we love the Heart Drum titles at Birchbark. They've been so successful, and it's so exciting to see how excited people are getting for Native YA titles and voices.
And I think, speaking of other books, I think we're getting close to 8 o'clock, but I think we can squeeze in maybe 1 or 2 more questions. And one thing that I think, I would imagine people are curious about is what books inspired you, especially while you were writing this one, and just in general, kind of what has influenced you over time? What are books that you constantly turn to, ones that you always have a copy of, keep close by?
Oh, wow. I mean, I love books and I love reading, and I kind of feel like travel is also a permanent condition for me, living in rural Minnesota and stuff like that. So I've actually used Audible quite a bit too, but I always have books going. And it really just depends on what's going on. You know, for my entertainment and pleasure, I got one kind of list of books, you know, information, and it just kind of ranges about, you know, what I'm working on. So I'll do everything from Game of Thrones to, you know, Barack Obama's new memoir to, you know, amazing stuff. I got Angeline Boulie's work queued up next, you know, because obviously she's just, you know, really hit it and is taking off, and we've been friends, you know, for a long time, so it's just amazing to see. But yeah, there's so many great works out there, and I also like looking for ones that my kids are interested in reading, and sometimes we'll read the same ones and talk about them and stuff like that. So yeah, everybody's getting Firekeeper's Daughter right now too.
It sells out so fast at Birchbark. It just, we get it and then it's gone.
Right.
Just kidding. I was just going to say, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So if folks need to, you know, we want to respect your hour. However, Anton has graciously said we can maybe stay a couple more minutes and get a few more of those questions in here. So
sure. So, yeah, you know, if you need to fly, you can fly with no shame. And I really appreciate you showing up tonight and tuning in for the book launch event. And I look forward to connecting with you in person. Feel free to reach out to me on my website. I'm happy to field questions that way. Lists of free resources there. And I have a busy travel schedule and lots of events. And so you can look there and see what's next in my itinerary. Happy to connect with you in many other ways. And then for anyone else who doesn't want to fly and wants to stick around, I'm happy to field a few more questions and visit. Chimigwech, thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for coming. Woohoo! Yay! I don't know if you all can see, but I have some major thunder and lightning action happening behind my window. So sorry if that's been distracting.
Oh, that's good. It usually happens when I have an event. Yeah, there's something dramatic. One time I was in France and I was giving a talk, and the second I finished my talk, France won the World Cup. And like, we were in an urban area and the whole city screamed. Like, people went running into the streets. They're all going crazy. And, you know, like, you couldn't even hear. We were in a totally different building. And I said, this happens all the time when I give a book talk.
Earlier there was a double rainbow back here too. So it is it's a good day.
Ari Tilson has a really lovely question. She says, or they say, when I was a teenager, I read the adult version of this wonderful book, and it meant so much as an Indigenous teen. I'm curious, what are you most excited about that is in this edition that wasn't in the earlier edition? That is a great question.
Oh, wow. You know, first of all, we added a whole section just on social activism because so much has been going on. A lot of it around environmental issues, but around race and many other topics as well. And so I'm really excited to speak to these issues and to speak directly to young people about these issues. I think, you know, the young people I've been talking to are so eager to see progress and change. My experience going to school is very different from the experience my children have had going to school. I mean, I had like physically violent racial experiences sometimes. My kids haven't, but you know, they've been dealing with things online and there's still lots of misunderstandings, and they too often feel imagined rather than understood and stuff like that. And so, you know, speaking directly to them and on topics that they're really excited and interested and passionate about. And also, you know, all cultures change over time. As a Native person, I feel ancient and modern all at the same time. And you know, a lot of the young people I speak to feel that too. They're eager to learn about their language, their history, and their culture. And they're also eager to be engaged with the modern world. And so I think it's really important that we speak to both dimensions of being Native. We don't have to look like we stepped off the set from Dances with Wolves to be an authentic Indigenous person. And at the same time, how much can a people change and still be the same people? There's this tension about cultural continuity and cultural change. And ultimately, I think Indigenous people should be the arbiters of what that should look like for them and their communities.
See, I saw one just a second ago, and now okay, here we go. Cassie Ramirez asks, what was Anton's first children's book that touched your heart? So I think like what was like perhaps one of the first books that you remember reading that really impacted you?
Yeah, you know, when I was a kid, it was pretty rare to have a book that had Indigenous stuff in it when I was a kid. And I remember looking for that and searching for that and wanting that. I mean, I had many, I'm like a regular human being, so there are many dimensions to my identity. And I actually really remember some of the stories that my mother would tell me. And I latched onto those because there was an Indigenous storyteller and it had Indigenous characters and, you know, things like that. And I found that so relatable. It was exciting for me as I got a little bit older and started finding works by and about Native people. And honestly, in the curriculum, you know, whatever, we'd read Beowulf or something like that, you know. It wasn't until college that I really started seeing, you know, Vine Deloria or something like that. I was like, yes, God is red. That's right, you know, and started to get really excited about, you know, Native people raising their voice. And I think it was a great inspiration to me about what I was going to do.
So yeah, I'm going to respond to a technical question from Jennifer of whether or not this will be recorded and put online. We are recording this. We will, we don't know exactly yet how it's going to go out in the world, but we will share it on our normal social medias. And I see that Jennifer says, do you have similar recorded content? And Anton, I've noticed that you've been posting some short lectures about culture and issues on your own personal. So that's something to look at too, Jennifer.
Yep, I have a YouTube channel. It's kind of relatively new, but you know, there's a growing body of stuff there on, you know, Some are on history, some are on culture, some are on Indigenous language. And then I've been doing public presenting for a long time. A lot of those have been recorded and posted in other places. So if you go to my YouTube channel too, you could just look at playlists and you'll find stuff that's just presentations by me and stuff like that. The free stuff is always good.
I agree. I have seen one question. It might be a question to unravel, a larger one, if you want to answer one of those. But it was about asking about land acknowledgements. And let me see if I can get the exact wording here.
Yeah.
I thought that's it's a hot topic. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, I could tell you this about land acknowledgements. First of all, they're good. Do it. But don't stop there.
Yeah.
You know, what land acknowledgements do is they, you know, try to render visibility to Indigenous people and acknowledge history. The kind of rules of thumb for a good land acknowledgement: it should acknowledge historical injustice. It should also acknowledge the contemporary existence and perseverance of Indigenous people. And there should be a call to action and it should be local specific to that organization and area. And so those sort of things are good. It's, you know, you can have a mission statement or a land acknowledgement that is used like window dressing, and you can also have one that actually helps shape and guide, you know, where you're going.
Security guard.
Thank you, Monica, for that question. It's a good one.
I think, you know, we're getting close to 8:10, so I think this would be a good time to say if there's anything, Anton, that you wanted to talk about that wasn't brought up, anything that you wanted to leave our audience with kind of thinking about, or any kind of final thoughts that you're just really like wanting to get out there before this call ends.
Okay, you know, first of all, there's no way to tap everything that's in a book like this in one sitting. So you just have to buy the book for that. But I do want to share this. You know, I didn't really give a lot of background on myself, although it's pretty easy for people to find. My father wasn't Native at all. He was actually an Austrian Jewish immigrant, a Holocaust survivor. He spoke nothing but German the first 13 years of his life. And both of his parents and 2 cousins made it out. That was 5 of them. Over 300 immediate family members were killed in the camps in the Nazi Holocaust. He made his way to Minnesota eventually. He's got a long and interesting story of his own. Met my mom, who comes from Leech Lake, which is one of the reservations in northern Minnesota. And obviously that's where I come from. And when my folks were getting started, among things you could say, my dad was hitting a restart button in his life. My mom was trying to find a pathway out of poverty. And as they were getting going, one of the things they did is they built, or my father had put in a bid on a piece of tax forfeited property, got a letter back saying, yours is the only bid, but it's not enough to cover the delinquent taxes. Can you find a couple $100 extra bucks? And he borrowed that and got a big piece of property for relatively little money. At one point, it had been a virgin white pine forest, clear cut and turned into farm fields. And what he did is he started planting trees. And it changed the entire landscape and the ecosystem. And that was one guy with a child labor force. That was me. But when I step out the door to my house, I see this towering forest of pine trees. And I think about the impact that one person can have. When we look at the big issues we need to deal with today, climate change, race relations, a lot of us look at those things and we think, how can I move this mountain of problems that humans have been making for thousands of years? And we think, I can't, but I'll try to be a decent human, tell my kids to be decent humans, and I hope it's enough. Although it's not really enough, because all that's necessary for evil to triumph is good people to do nothing or too little. But it's not like we got to move this mountain of problems to affect change so much as we need to keep planting the seeds. We can transform the landscape and the entire ecosystem. And that's what we're doing when we write a book, when we teach a young person, when we engage in education. And so I always feel hopeful every time I look out the door to my house. and every time I have conversations with all the good folks who are on a call like this. And so I just want to encourage everyone to keep leaning in, keep planting the seeds, and we'll make a better world. Miigwech.
Miigwech, thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoy the book and enjoy the rest of your evening. Hopefully we will see some of you in person someday soon.
Yes, and thank you, Anton. This has been an absolutely beautiful conversation, very enriching, very inspiring. So thankful to be a part of it. And yeah, reminder that the book is available at birchbarkbooks.com. So you can go there and get the book if you don't already have it. And yeah, like Halee said, hope to see some of you in person some point. Reminder, the 24th and the 25th, we will be having, weather permitting, an outdoor market. So if you're missing browsing, that's probably a good time to stop by. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here, a part of this call.